Evan stumbled through the thick alien jungle, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he pushed aside giant leaves that dripped with an oily green substance. The crash had left him shaken and sore, and the cold ache in his muscles reminded him with every step that he was far from home. The ground beneath his boots was uneven, soft in some places, and hard as stone in others, and every sound of rustling in the shadows made him freeze and glance around the strange trees stretched high above, blocking most of the light, and the air smelled of wet soil and sweet fruit, yet there was always a bitter edge to it, a smell that reminded him of predators waiting unseen. He had been searching for water and shelter since the wreck, his ship lying broken and smoking miles behind him, and hope was fading fast each time he thought he heard something behind him. He would turn and find nothing but twisting vines and shadows that moved with the wind, but he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. The first time he saw it was only a flicker of movement between the trees, a tall figure with too many limbs moving silently across the branches, its glowing eyes like pale lanterns in the darkness. His heart had slammed against his ribs, and he had stumbled backward into a patch of thorned plants that tore at his jacket. But by the time he got his bearings, the figure was gone. That night he made a small camp near the roots of a massive tree. He dared not light a full fire, fearing it would draw attention, but the creeping cold made him risk a small flame. He sat close to it, clutching a sharpened branch as if it were a real weapon, and listened to the jungle whisper and click around him. The wind moved strangely here, as if it carried voices. He tried to tell himself he was imagining things, but then came the sound, soft but deliberate, a rhythmic clicking from somewhere just beyond the firelight. He strained his eyes and saw a shape crouched low in the shadows, tall, slender, with arms and legs that bent at sharp angles, glinting eyes fixed on him. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He tightened his grip on the branch, ready to thrust it forward if the creature lunged. The clicking grew louder as the figure shifted slightly, and in the dim glow of the fire, he saw the faint shimmer of what looked like webbing trailing behind it, strands that clung to the ground and glowed faintly in the dark. His thoughts raced. She or it was a hunter, and he was trapped alone. No backup, no weapons beyond a stick and a dwindling flame. Figure moved a step closer, and he felt every muscle in his body lock with fear. He could almost see the sharp tips of its limbs, now the mandible-like shapes near its mouth, the strange patterns on its chitinous skin that reflected the firelight in eerie colors. He remembered survival training telling him to stand tall to make himself look bigger, but his legs felt like stone, and his voice failed him completely. The figure tilted its head as if studying him, then slipped back into the shadows with a speed that left him blinking at the empty space. Could not sleep after that. Every crack of a branch made him flinch. Every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. When dawn finally came, he found a small animal lying near the ashes of his fire, its neck cleanly broken, its body untouched. His stomach turned. The creature had left him food, or perhaps a message, a sign that it was watching him and could end him at any moment. Evan backed away from the offering, heart pounding louder than ever, and one thought burned in his mind. He had to keep moving. He had to escape, because whatever that alien Arachnid girl wanted from him, he was certain it would end with him being her next. Even left the campsite as soon as the pale light of morning reached through the thick canopy above. He could not bear to look at the small animal lying cold and still near the ashes of his fire. He stepped around it as if even touching it would bring the creature back to him, and quickened his pace, pushing himself deeper into the alien jungle. The trees seemed taller in the daylight, their trunks twisting high into the mist. The air was heavy and warm, and every step he took left him drenched in sweat. But he did not slow. His mind replayed the glowing eyes from the night before, the way they had watched him with a strange stillness, the image of the limbs shifting against the shadows, and it kept him moving forward. He tried to tell himself he could find a place the creature could not reach, a cave or a hidden hollow, but the jungle seemed endless. The roots of the trees rose out of the ground like walls of dark wood, and thick vines hung low, forcing him to cut through them with a sharp Shard of metal he had scavenged from the wreck, he stopped only to drink from a shallow stream. And even then, his eyes darted back and forth at every ripple in the water. He noticed small webbed patterns clinging to some of the rocks nearby. They were thin, nearly invisible, but he knew at once they belonged to her. The alien girl had passed through here. He imagined her walking the branches above, silently watching his every move, waiting for the right time. Evan decided to change direction, following the stream until it forked, hoping to throw her off, but deep inside, he knew it would not work. She was faster than him, and this was her world. He was just a weak intruder. He pushed the thought away and tried to focus on survival. He needed to keep ahead, and he needed food. He found strange fruit growing on a vine, and after testing a tiny piece for any reaction, he ate more than he should have. The sweetness filled his mouth, but it did little to ease the heavy dread in his stomach. As he walked, he kept thinking of the animal left at his camp, the way its body had been unmarked. The gesture felt deliberate, as if the creature had been sending him a message. Perhaps she wanted him to accept her offering, but he could not understand why. He was not one of her kind, and he did not belong here. She was a predator, and he was prey. It was as simple as that. The soft clicking noises returned by midday, carried on the humid air, and Evan froze, gripping the shard of metal tighter. His eyes swept the trees, but he saw nothing, just a faint shimmer of web threads stretching between branches, too far up for him to reach. He realized with horror that the webbing was not random. It was forming a path leading him forward. The fear made his chest tighten, and he broke into a run, crashing through the undergrowth, and ignoring the sharp cuts the thorns left on his arms and legs. He had no idea where he was going, but every instinct screamed that he could not follow the path she had laid out. His breath grew ragged, his muscles burned, yet he kept running until he stumbled into a small clearing. The light from the sky reached the ground here, warming the soil. But Evan could not enjoy the rare brightness, because in the center of the clearing he saw another offering lying on a flat stone. This time it was larger, a bird-like creature, its wings folded neatly as if placed with care. Evan backed away slowly, the hair on his neck rising. It felt as though invisible eyes were boring into his back. He turned and nearly tripped over the roots behind him. His hands scraped the dirt as he scrambled upright. The clicking noise was louder now, closer. He looked up into the branches and thought he saw her shape move between the leaves, slender limbs gripping the bark effortlessly, the gleam of her eyes piercing the shadows. He shouted at her to leave him alone, his voice hoarse with fear, but there was no response. Just the soft rustle of movement above. He grabbed a large branch from the ground and held it like a spear, determined not to go down without a fight. He left the clearing without touching the offering and pressed deeper into the jungle. The sunlight dimmed once more under the thick canopy, and the forest grew quiet, too quiet. He could hear only his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He stopped to catch his breath, leaning against a tree, and that was when a strand of sticky silk brushed across his face. He recoiled in panic, wiping at it, but it clung stubbornly to his skin and hair. His hands shook as he tore it free and looked up at the web above him. It was vast, stretching from tree to tree, and strong enough to trap something much larger than him. He stumbled backward and stepped into another strand, then another. The webbing was all around him, and he realized with a sinking feeling that he had walked straight into a trap. The clicking returned, and this time it came from directly behind him. Evan turned slowly, every muscle in his body tense, and there she was, stepping out from the shadows, her tall frame framed by the shifting light of the jungle. Her limbs moved with an unsettling grace, the faint patterns of color across her chitin reflecting the soft glow from her eyes. She did not attack, but instead stood still, watching him as if waiting for him to act. Evan raised the branch in trembling hands, telling himself this was his last chance. If she lunged, he would strike and hope it was enough to drive her back. Yet deep down he knew she was stronger, faster, and he was trapped in her web like a helpless insect. Evan stood frozen, the heavy branch trembling in his hands as the alien Arachnid girl moved closer, her long limbs barely making a sound as they touched the Ground. The clicking sound came from deep within her throat, soft and slow, not aggressive, yet it sent shivers crawling up his spine. Her glowing eyes fixed on him in a way that made him feel small and exposed, as though she could see every beat of his racing heart. He tried to force his voice to work, tried to yell at her to stay back, but his throat was dry, and the only sound he could make was a hoarse whisper that carried no strength. She took another step forward, and Evan's grip tightened on the branch, sweat rolling down his back. He swung the branch in a wide arc, hoping to keep her away, but she moved with fluid speed, bending her body out of reach as if the motion required no effort. He stumbled when the swing missed, and almost fell into the sticky strands behind him. She stopped just a few steps away, tilting her head to one side, the glowing eyes never leaving his. He noticed details he had missed before. Her mandibles were not fixed in a permanent snarl. They twitched slightly like nervous fingers, and her patterned skin shimmered with faint colors that changed when she moved. Evan tried again to speak, his voice shaky. He told her to stay away, that he would fight if she came closer, but his words felt meaningless against the quiet jungle. The girl raised one of her limbs and extended it slowly toward him. Evan flinched, expecting a strike, yet the limb stopped short. Just a breath away from his chest, she held it there unmoving, as though offering it to him. Then with a sudden swift motion, she caught the branch he held and plucked it easily from his hands. The strength in that single action was enough to remind him how hopelessly outmatched he was. He fell backward against the tree trunk, gasping in fear as she leaned down over him, her limbs surrounding him in a cage that left no room to escape. He felt the silk threads of her web brushing his arms and legs, and braced himself for the pain of claws or fangs, but instead, she clicked softly again and stepped back, leaving him untouched. Evan blinked in disbelief, unsure if he had imagined it. Then she reached into a small pouch-like fold near her waist and withdrew something small and round. It looked like a piece of alien fruit glowing faintly from within. She placed it carefully on the ground in front of him and stepped back again, her limbs folding close, as if waiting for him to understand. Evan stared at the fruit, then at her, trying to make sense of the gesture. She was feeding him, perhaps preparing him like a predator, fattening prey for later. But the look in her eyes was not hunger, it was something else, curiosity, maybe even concern. His stomach twisted with fear and confusion. He refused to touch the fruit, hoping it would make her leave, but she remained still, watching him patiently. He wondered how long she would wait, minutes, hours, he did not know. As the silence stretched, Evan decided he had to do something. He pushed himself to his feet, moving slowly so as not to provoke her, and took a cautious step toward the edge of the web. She clicked once, sharp and quick, making him freeze. Her body shifted slightly as though warning him not to run. Evan lifted his hands, showing he held no weapon, and tried to speak calmly, though his voice cracked with every word he told her. He did not understand her, that he only wanted to leave, but she only tilted her head again, the faint colors on her skin flickering from dark to light. Suddenly a noise in the distance broke the standoff, a deep growl that rumbled through the trees. Evan turned sharply toward the sound and saw movement in the shadows, something massive slinking between the trunks. It was larger than any creature he had yet seen on this world, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on the web he was caught in. He felt the blood drain from his face, the predator's muscles shifted under its scaly hide, and its jaws opened. In a low snarl, Evan stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The alien girl moved instantly, her limbs spreading wide as she stepped in front of him, a low hiss rising from her throat. Her body seemed to grow larger, her patterns flashing brighter, colors that pulsed like a warning. The predator in the shadows hesitated, snarling again before stepping into the faint light. Evan could now see the length of its fangs and the claws that dug into the soil as it advanced. He braced for the girl to run and abandon him, but instead, she crouched, ready to strike, her limbs weaving strands of silk with such speed he could barely follow. Evan could hardly breathe as he watched her stand between him and the predator. The creature lunged, and the girl darted forward, her limbs striking with precision. The web lines she had woven stretched taut and tangled the predator's legs, bringing it crashing to the ground. She hissed louder, stabbing her limbs into the soil around the beast to hold. It down her strength was astonishing, yet she made sure to keep Evan behind her, shielded from harm. Struggle was over quickly. The predator fought until it was trapped, completely bound in layer upon layer of silk. It thrashed once more before falling still. The girl stepped back, breathing hard, her patterns dimming as the threat passed. Evan stared at her in stunned silence, unsure what to say. She had not attacked him, she had saved him. She turned to face him again. Evan's fear was still there, but it had changed. He looked into her glowing eyes and for the first time thought maybe she was not a monster after all. She bent low, picked up the fruit she had left on the ground, and held it out to him again. This time her gesture seemed clearer, an offering of peace and survival. Evan hesitated only a moment before reaching out with a trembling hand and taking the fruit. Evan held the fruit in his hand, its glow faint and warm against his trembling fingers. The alien Arachnid girl stood silently before him, her tall frame still and expectant, as though waiting for a decision. He looked at the fruit, then at her, unsure of what would happen if he accepted it, and equally unsure of what might happen if he refused. The memory of her saving him from the predator still played over and over in his mind. She had no reason to protect him, no reason to risk herself, and yet she had stood between him and certain death. That single act was enough to stir something deep inside him, a faint whisper that maybe he had been wrong about her from the beginning. Slowly, he raised the fruit to his mouth, the sweet smell surprising after days of fear and hunger. He bit into it, and the taste was unlike anything he had known, soft and cool, with a burst of energy that seemed to fill his body with warmth. When he looked up, the girl tilted her head again, the patterns on her skin glowing softly in what he could only guess was a sign of approval. She stepped closer, but not too close, and crouched low on her limbs, tapping the ground gently with one claw-like finger, then pointing to him, then to herself, as if trying to create a bridge of meaning. Evan frowned, trying to make sense of the gesture. He repeated the same motion, pointing at himself, then at her. She clicked softly in response, a rhythm of sound that felt less like threat and more like communication. He realized she was trying to teach him her language, or at least help him understand her intentions. He tapped his chest and said his name slowly. Evan then pointed at her. She made a sound that was almost musical, clicking with a softer tone. He tried to mimic it, but his attempt was clumsy and awkward. She made the sound again, this time slower, and he understood that it was her name. Lyra, he said as best he could, and for a brief moment, the patterns on her skin shimmered brightly like a spark of happiness. He felt a strange comfort, seeing her react in such a way. It was as though a small wall between them had begun to crumble. They spent the next hour trading sounds and gestures, Evan pointing to objects around them and saying their names while Lyra responded with her own words or clicks. He learned she had been following him not as a predator, but as a protector. She would draw simple symbols in the soft soil with one claw, showing shapes of larger creatures and marking paths she had taken to keep him away from danger. The gifts of dead animals, he now realized, were not meant as warnings or threats, but as food offerings. She had watched him struggle and had tried to help in the only way. She knew guilt washed over him as he thought of how many times he had cursed her presence and how he had believed she was preparing to eat him when in truth she had been looking after him all along. He met her eyes and whispered an apology, though he knew she could not understand his words fully. Something in her gentle clicking made him believe she felt his meaning. As the day passed, they worked together to gather food, Lyra showing him which fruits were safe and which plants would sting or poison. Evan was amazed at how easily she moved through the jungle, her limbs allowing her to climb and leap in ways he could not. She would disappear into the trees only to return moments later with something useful, her sharp eyes always scanning the forest for hidden dangers. He followed her lead, learning little by little how to navigate the alien world. That night, when they settled near a wide stream, Lyra wove a shelter from her silk, strong and flexible enough to keep the cold air and small predators away. Evan sat beneath it, marveling at how quickly she created such a structure. She sat across from him, her glowing eyes watching him in the dim light. He realized he no longer felt the same fear that had ruled him since the crash. He felt something else, a fragile sense of safety. Evan tried to ask her about herself, pointing to her and drawing a small circle in the dirt with several lines. Around it she seemed to understand because she lowered her head and tapped the ground 8 times, then paused. Her body language shifted, the bright colors on her skin fading. As though touched by sadness, she pointed to herself and then spread her limbs wide toward the empty jungle. Evan understood at once. She was alone. Her kind were gone or far away, and the silence in her eyes told him it was a wound she carried every day. He reached out slowly and touched the ground near her claw, not daring to touch her directly, but hoping she would feel the meaning of the gesture. She looked at him, the glow of her eyes soft and warm, before clicking quietly, a sound that felt like gratitude in its own way. They sat like that for a long while, with only the quiet sounds of the jungle around them. Evan thought of the shipwreck and the fact that no rescue had come yet. The thought that he might never see another human again filled him with the same emptiness he had seen in Lyra. But then he looked at her and realized he was not truly alone. Not anymore. He wanted to tell her that they would survive together, that they could watch each other's backs in this dangerous place. He tried to form the words with gestures, pointing to the jungle, then pointing at both of them side by side. She studied him, and after a moment clicked softly in agreement. A shared promise made without words. The bond between them was fragile but real, and Evan knew they had a chance now, as long as they stayed together. He fell asleep that night under the silk shelter with the faint sound of Lyra's clicking nearby. Not as a threat, but as a lullaby of safety. For the first time since the crash, he felt hope. Evan woke to the sound of distant thunder rolling softly through the jungle, but when he opened his eyes, he realized it was not thunder at all. The ground was trembling faintly, and the deep growl that echoed through the trees sent a cold wave of fear racing down his spine. Lyra was already awake, standing outside the silk shelter, her glowing eyes fixed on the shadows of the forest, her body held low and tense. She clicked a warning to him, the sound sharp and urgent. Evan crawled out, clutching the sharp piece of metal he still carried, though he knew it would do little against whatever was coming. The trembling grew stronger, and a large shape appeared between the trees, its massive head swinging back and forth as it sniffed the air. The creature was unlike anything Evan had seen before, towering over even the largest trees, with a height of dark scales and claws that tore up the soil with each step. Its eyes glowed yellow like the predator Lyra had defeated earlier, but this beast was many times larger. Its roar shook the ground and birds scattered into the sky in a panic. Evan felt his knees weaken. This was no random encounter. The creature had been tracking them. Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between Evan and the beast, her limbs spread wide in a display of defiance. Evan could see the patterns on her chitin flash bright colors, as they had when she fought before, but this time the predator seemed unfazed. It charged through the trees with terrifying speed, and Lyra leapt to meet it, her silk spinning in long, thick strands that clung to the beast's legs. She darted around it, striking and weaving, but the creature thrashed violently, ripping free from the webbing with sheer strength. It swiped at her with one massive claw, and she barely dodged the blow, the ground splitting where it struck. Evan's heart pounded as he realized Lyra could not hold the predator alone. He searched desperately for a way to help. His eyes fell on a large tree leaning dangerously over the clearing, its trunk weakened by age. If he could bring it down, it might trap the beast. He ran to the tree, climbing its wide roots, and began hacking at the base with his metal shard. Every strike sent a jolt up his arms, but he did not stop. Lyra's hissing cries filled the air as she fought, the predator keeping its attention away from him. The tree creaked under the strain, and Evan shouted for Lyra to move back. As the predator lunged at her, she spun away just in time. Evan gave one final strike, and the trunk split with a thunderous crack. The tree toppled slowly, then crashed down onto the beast, pinning it beneath the heavy branches. The predator roared in rage, thrashing and snapping, but the weight of the tree held it down. Lyra wasted no time darting forward to bind it with layers of thick silk, her limbs moving in a blur until the creature could no longer move. The jungle fell. Silent except for the predator's labored breathing, Evan collapsed to his knees, exhausted his arms. Shaking from the effort, Lyra approached him carefully, her glowing eyes. Studying him as though trying to understand what he had done, he looked up at her and managed a small smile, telling her in a trembling voice that they had done it together. She clicked softly, the sound low and warm, and for the first time Evan believed he understood her without words. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and repairing the small transmitter from his wrecked ship, using pieces of metal and wire Lyra had collected from the jungle. Evan worked with careful hands while Lyra held the fragile parts steady with her silk. When the device finally sparked to life, he felt tears sting his eyes. The faint signal it emitted was weak, but it was enough to reach a nearby human outpost days. Later, a rescue ship descended through the jungle canopy, its engines scattering leaves and dust. Evan stood beside Lyra as the crew rushed forward, their weapons drawn. When they saw her, he stepped in front of her, raising his hands to stop them, his voice strong and certain, as he explained that she was not the enemy. She had saved his life more times than he could count. The crew hesitated, but when they saw the calm way Lyra stood behind him, they lowered their weapons. Evan faced Lyra, then unsure of what would happen next. Part of him feared she would choose to stay on the planet, but when he gestured to the ship, she clicked softly and stepped forward. He felt relief wash over him as she followed him aboard, the crew giving her space as they lifted off the ground, the jungle shrinking beneath them. As the ship rose higher, Evan stood at a window, looking out at the endless stretch of alien forest. He thought of the fear that had consumed him when he first saw Lyra, of how he had believed she wanted to eat him, and how wrong he had been. She had shown him strength and kindness in a world that could have killed him 100 times over, and now as the stars filled the sky, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. Lyra stood beside him, her glowing eyes watching the same stars, their reflections shining on the glass. Evan turned to her and said softly that they would face the future together. Wherever it led, she tilted her head at the sound of his voice, then clicked in a way he had come to understand as agreement. The ship carried them into the vastness of space, and Evan knew the galaxy would never feel as lonely again with Lyra by his side. The end.